2 years ago, Bharat entered the elite space club as Chandrayaan-3 landed on the moon's south pole, making India the first country to do so. And as we speak, the world and India has welcomed back one of its own space heroes, Sunita Williams, who has spent an incredible 286 days in space. We are in the middle of an exciting new space age with private players joining the fray, driven by visionary billionaires seeking to leave a lasting legacy, setting their sights on daring goals, from launching a space tourism sector and colonizing Mars. So buckle up, everyone, as we get to now dive into the fascinating world of space. Please join me in welcoming Scott Kelly, former NASA astronaut and retired US Navy captain who spent a year in space. And this is a session that's titled Spacewalk, Rocketing Towards Future. He is in conversation with Palki Sharma.
He has seen the world from a perspective that we can only imagine. 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface, orbiting the planet at, 28,000 kilometers an hour. He spent 340 days in space, testing the limits of human endurance and science. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Captain Scott Kelly.
Thank you.
First question, which I'm sure is in the minds of everyone watching here. What is it like to be in space?
You know, spaceflight is probably one of the most exciting things you can do for, I think, most people. Certainly not for everyone. You know, there's the excitement of the launch. In my case, I flew 2 missions on the space shuttle, 7 million pounds of thrust instantly on liftoff. There's the microgravity, which is fun to float around and fly around. Makes most things harder to do, however. Certainly the view of the Earth is absolutely spectacular. Coming back is also amazing, you know, returning to this wonderful planet that we have. But what I like the most about flying in space is that it's a really, really hard and challenging thing to do. Probably one of the most challenging things you can do. A job that has immense risk, but likewise much reward. And to be able to do it with an incredible group of people, your colleagues that you fly in space with, people on the ground, I think for me, the challenge and the team that you get to do it with is the best part about it, however.
What does a typical day look like on the International Space Station, and what is not so typical about your day there?
Well, a typical day, we operate on the space station on Greenwich Mean Time. So you generally wake up, 6 in the morning, Greenwich time. You might do some quick science experiments that involve taking like medical samples of yourself that you have to do when you wake up. Quickly do your morning activities like making believe you're taking a shower by, moving the dirt around on your body with a washcloth, having a quick breakfast. And then the next 12 hours is a combination of doing science experiments, doing general maintenance, kind of like things you would do in your home just to keep it operating, and then fixing the hardware that may break, that's unexpected. You do a lot of exercise, and then at the end of the day, probably around dinner time, maybe 7 o'clock in the evening, you woke up at 6, so 13 hours later, you have a conference with the ground to talk about the plan the next day, eat dinner, and then maybe have a couple hours of your own time in the evening, and then repeat that the next day. Occasionally, it's interrupted by things like doing a spacewalk or robotics activities, but generally speaking, most days it's a combination of doing science and, just fixing stuff or maintaining stuff on the space station.
Do you get the weekends off?
We get like 1 day off generally a week if things are going normally. So it's mostly about 6 days of work a week with a Sunday off. You generally exercise either 6 or 7 days a week. Some people exercise every single day. I had to always take a day off. It was more like a mental health day for me where I had to just relax and try to do nothing if I could get away with it.
Yes, I'll come to mental health in a bit, but I'm sure you're asked this a lot. You spent almost a year up in space. What is the one thing that people on Earth tend to underestimate or not really understand about being in space?
Well, I think a lot of people think that the microgravity would be the most awesome thing ever. Whether it's, being able to go from here to the other side of the room very quickly with little effort. Yeah, that's fun. But it makes most things that you do so much more difficult when you can't put anything down. You always have to either stick it in your pocket, tape it to the wall, Velcro it somewhere. There are two things that are easier. Everything else is harder, and that is moving stuff that is heavy because it no longer has weight, still has mass. You have to be conscious of things that have a lot of mass when you're moving it around. And then just putting your body in different positions to do your work. That's very easy to do that. Everything else is harder, including sleeping. I think, we evolved sleeping in gravity. And for me, there are certain aspects of sleeping in space that are more comfortable and certain aspects that are less comfortable. And overall, I just always prefer to sleep in a nice bed with a pillow.
Right. I suppose most people's point of reference is the Big Bang Theory. I'm sure the real deal is different. You want to comment on that?
I was just going to say I've never seen it.
Oh, you've not? Okay. How does it change your body? And I know that you have a twin, and when you came back after 340 days up in space, then NASA studied the genetic and physical changes. What was it about that report that surprised you the most?
Well, we evolved in gravity. Our physiology is based on, much of it is based on trying to push blood from our legs into our upper body, to our vital organs, to our brain. And in the absence of that gravity, our cardiovascular systems don't have to work as hard, whether it's your heart or your blood vessels constricting to keep that blood up. On my last mission, that was 340 days, I lost 25% of my heart mass. My wife, Amiko, there says, good thing I had a big heart beforehand. It all came back eventually. But you lose bone mass, you lose muscle mass, 1% each for every month you're in space if you didn't do anything about it. So, like, if you were in space for 100 months and you never exercised, you'd have no skeleton left. You'd be like, I don't know, Gumby, a little toy that has rubbery kind of toy. There's a fluid shift to your head that can be very uncomfortable. That never quite goes away, even after my last day in space of 340 days. I still had a head that felt swollen. That pressure affects your vision. We have astronauts that have vision problems. You may notice if you see my brother, he doesn't wear glasses. He doesn't have a vision correction that he needs because, he's only flown in space for like 50 days compared to my 500. He loves when I point that out. So there are those effects. There's effects of radiation. In space, we get anywhere from 10 to 20 chest X-ray equivalent of radiation every day in space, and that has effects on our genetics, whether it's gene expression, turning different genes on or off. There was actually an experiment. My brother is also a former astronaut, my twin brother, and we had this comparative study between the two of us comparing our genetics, and there was an experiment on our telomeres. And our telomeres are the ends of our chromosomes. And as we age, they get smaller and frayed. It's really an indication of our physical age. And the hypothesis of this experiment was that me in space, the stress, maybe the radiation, things that they don't know, my telomeres would have certainly got older or smaller or more damaged compared to his, but they actually got better. And NASA was really surprised about this. When you have an experiment and the hypothesis is the exact opposite from the results, that's quite surprising. You're trying basically to prove the hypothesis. And it was the opposite. Mine got better compared to his. Initially, we thought it was due to the controlled diet and the exercise. But about 6 months after I got home, NASA learned that the Japanese Space Agency had a telomere experiment going on at the same time I was on the space station with these little worms, and their telomeres got better too, just like mine did. And I never once saw those guys working out on the treadmill or doing any kind of exercise. So there was more to it than that. And we actually learned that radiation can exercise your telomeres in a good direction. May have some other negative effects, but at least your telomeres are getting better.
That's very interesting. And these are all tangible changes that one can measure. What about the psychological toll that it takes to be up there? How do you deal with the isolation?
Well, I think everyone handles the isolation differently in some respect. Now, most astronauts are very highly vetted, even psychologically. When I was interviewing to become an astronaut, they gave us written psychological exams. You meet with psychologists, psychiatrists. Leading up to a mission, you may have meetings with two psychologists, two psychiatrists at the same time leading up to the flight. In the flight, you have regular, every 2 weeks, you'll have a conference call with them. So NASA and our international partners obviously take mental health really seriously, which is important. And I wish the rest of the world would consider mental health just as important as our physical health, because our brain is the most complex thing the human brain that's ever existed, and there's this stigma around that. But NASA takes that very, very seriously. So everyone handles this a little bit different. But for me, on my last mission in particular, it was actually easier to be in space for 340 days than it was for my 150-day mission. And the reason is, it's because one of the reasons I was there for a long time was to be there for a long time. It was part of my mission objective. So my point is, when you are expecting something, and how it turns out, when it meets your expectations, when you're prepared for it, it can sometimes be easier than maybe something that you might perceive to be easier.
like being sent for 8 days and being there for 9 months.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that takes a whole different level of mental toughness. We've seen the case with Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. That mission was supposed to last only for 8 days, and a lot has been said about it, even in the political circles. Who do you think is to blame for this? U.S. President Trump and Elon Musk say that it's the Biden administration that must take responsibility for what was obviously a big fiasco.
Well, we build spacecraft. Any country that's going to build a spacecraft needs to fly it for the first time on a test flight. And when you're testing something for the first time, you expect things to go wrong. And in the case of this Boeing spacecraft that Butch and Sonny launched on, it had some serious issues. NASA decided that it was safer to bring that spacecraft home without the two crew members on it. So that's what they did. They returned it. As soon as they had another spacecraft up there that Butch and Sonny could return on in the event of an emergency. And that was decided in August, that in September they would launch a SpaceX, which thankfully we have 2 vehicles, and SpaceX has, so far been pretty reliable. But they launched the SpaceX in September with 2 crew members on board, where they normally have 4. And they did that so there would be room for Butch and Sonny. and that's the spacecraft they came home on a few weeks ago. So that was always there with them the entire time, and the decision to bring them home on that spacecraft was made last August.
Let's switch gears, and you've openly spoken about your early academic struggles. So what was the turning point? How did a boy who struggled academically end up in NASA and become an astronaut?
I think one word, and it's inspiration. And I think inspiration is important because all kids are motivated differently. I was this young kid that had trouble in school. I wanted to do well. I would always show up the first day of school and think, I'm going to turn this whole situation around. I'm going to become a straight A student. And by day 3, I was 3 days behind in homework and thinking about the next year. I graduated in the bottom half of my high school class. I went to college because that's what everyone was doing, or at least my friends were, so I thought I should go to college also. So I went to the only college that I got into. I applied to a few, got into one. At the time, wasn't a great school. Still struggling, not doing well. Eventually, I'm not even going to class. And basically on the path to being a first-year college dropout. And I don't know what I would have done had what happened next had that not happened. But one day I was just walking across the college campus, happened to go into the bookstore to buy like gum or a snack or something, not a book. Was not a big reader, but I saw this book on the end of the shelf, and it was had this really cool cover, cool title, picked it up, looked at it, read the back, and the book was The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. And I took my gum money, bought that book, read it. It took me about 3 days. I was very proud. I had finally read a whole book. And but I recognized that in the pages of that book, there were these fighter pilots that became the test pilots, that became the original Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts. And I felt like I had something very much in common with them, with one exception, and that is I couldn't pay attention and do my homework. And I didn't do well in school. But if I could only become a good student, maybe I could graduate from college someday, maybe I could go on and be a pilot in the Navy. Maybe if not the Navy, maybe the Air Force. Generally easier. I know that doesn't translate well here, but, military guys in the U.S. laugh at that joke. Maybe become an astronaut someday. And, I know, you think 18-year-old kid reads book, decides he or she's going to become an astronaut. That's a giant leap. But really, for me, in retrospect, what it was a foundation and a bunch of much more smaller, manageable steps built on that foundation that would have never started without the inspiration I found from a book. And I think it's important to recognize that all kids are different and they need to find their own inspiration wherever they can.
What an extraordinary story. And let us show our audience here some pictures from the time you landed.
I don't think that's not me, though.
That's not you?
No. I wish it was.
Oh, those are the pictures. Can you see them? These are yours. Yeah. This is you, right?
Yeah, that's me looking at the cupola of the International Space Station. That's day 1 of a year in space. That's the U.S. laboratory module. I don't know if you want me to narrate these.
That'd be nice if you want to tell us about the pictures.
Yeah, I don't know. That's, I think, somewhere in South America. Watching the Super Bowl on the International Space Station by myself. Some aurora. We can go on. Selfie. Space selfie.
Some things don't change between Earth and the space.
I think that's Spain. Yeah.
Fabulous. What a story. What a story. What is your message to young people? You spoke about inspiration and you judged a book by its cover and it changed your life. But I'm sure it took a lot of discipline as well from what you told me about what a typical day on the space station is like. How do you strike a balance and what should they do to sort of maybe strike big, go to space, achieve their dreams?
Well, I think it's important for I know a lot of kids want to be astronauts, and they'll come to me sometimes and say, hey, I want to be an astronaut. What should I do? And I tell them, hey, choose the career field that you like, that you're interested in. Certainly, if you want to work in the space industry, it probably should be something that's technical, science, mathematics, engineering. But choose something you like, because if you don't like it, you're not going to do well in it. And space agencies, I'm sure your space agency is very similar to NASA in that regard, and that we want people that have done well in their chosen career fields. That's very important, because that's probably the biggest indicator of how you're going to do in your next job, how you've done in your past job. But I think it's very important for people to love their work. I always felt like in my 20 years in the Navy, my 20 years working at NASA, some of that, 25 years in the Navy, 20 at NASA, they overlapped a lot, that it was never a job. It always felt to me like a hobby that I was just fortunate to get paid to do, and I wish everyone else would have that kind of privilege to have a career like that.
Here in India, we are very emotional about our space program, and we are very proud of what ISRO has been able to do. The world did not give them a chance, but we've seen what they've been able to achieve with the Chandrayaan-3 mission and now Gaganyaan. How do you see ISRO's rise?
How do I see what?
ISRO's rise, the Indian Space Agency's rise, and what they've been able to do.
Well, I think it's, you mean Indian Space Agency. I think it's very exciting. I mean, landing on the South Pole of the moon. I've met recently, we had our every other year astronaut reunion in Houston. I got to meet a couple of the Indian astronauts that are training there, particularly the guy, I guess, who's going to fly the first mission on the Indian rocket. Very professional, very excited. I think you have a great future. You definitely have the technology to be successful, and the talent to be successful. Like what I mentioned earlier, my brother, who's it's kind of ironic that he used to say this years ago, as an example, going to Mars, it's not about rocket science. It's about political science. Because we really have the technology we need. We know what we need to do it. What we need is the public support to elect officials that believe in the mission, that believe in science, so they can provide the funds to get there. So, yeah, I think as long as your country is excited about it and supports it, you'll be successful.
Captain Scott Kelly, thank you very much for your words of inspiration and for sharing your fabulous story with our audience here. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.